Hey folks, you are tuning in to Common Groundwater, a podcast by the Michigan Environmental Council, where we go across the state to talk about the environment. We talk about stories about the environment, we talk about problems facing it and the solutions to those problems. I'm Bo Brockett, your host, and joining me today in the Lansing office of the Environmental Council is Shikha Singh, the coordinator and biologist for the Jackson, Lenawee, and Washtenaw Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area, or JLW SISMA.
Correct, yeah.
Welcome.
It's a mouthful.
It is. I didn't think I could pull it off, but I did on the first try, which was great. In all honesty, I practiced it ahead of time because I knew it would flub me up a bit. But thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. You are taking part in our pollinator mini-series here on the podcast, where we are talking about the ways in which butterflies, bees, bats, beetles, etc. Interact with various parts of Michigan, right? Agriculture, gardens. And today you and I are here to talk about a bit of a grander sort of subject, how they interact with ecosystems at large. Before we get in, just wanted to give a few quick shout outs as we usually do. So first, a shout out to our production partner, NRDC, who's helping make this Pollinator podcast series possible. And then want to give a shout out to the Stewardship Network, who helped connect us too. Yeah. So really appreciate them.
They're a wonderful partner. I mean, they do so much as well. So we're really glad to work with them. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as I usually start in the podcast, would you mind introducing yourself and your organization? What do you do, and how does it interact with your employer?
Yeah, so as you'd mentioned, my name is Shikha Singh, and I am the JLW SISMA coordinator. And I am actually a biologist in the Jackson County Conservation District. So this program is housed in the Jackson Conservation District. And essentially we are just like a group of partners and people who are interested in invasive species and who have come together to provide services to address some of those invasive species needs in the community. And so specifically, I work in the Jackson, Lenawee, Washtenaw area, but there is someone like me who covers every single county in Michigan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's, and we do a variety of things. We do survey and management. Sometimes we do management ourselves, sometimes we do contracted treatment. Sometimes we can work on public and private land, which is kind of unique because sometimes, government officials are like limited or county officials are limited. So we're able to straddle both public and private lands, which makes us a unique partner to have. And we also do a lot of education and outreach, kind of like things like this. And it's really important because we really want people to be aware of what invasive species are. It's like a hot new topic. People are learning more and more about it. I know like when we were growing up, like probably the zebra mussel, sea lamprey, some of those top, 80s, 90s species are a focus. But now there are a lot of other species that are coming into focus, things like shrubs, things like plants, insects that people are encountering. And so we really want to highlight some of those issues. And if you don't mind, I want to go and define what an invasive species is because sometimes people don't really get that definition correct. I mean, I've gotten things from it's something to be protected, something that's good, something that's bad. But the official definition is it's some type of species that is not from around here. And in addition to not being from around here, it also has to cause or has a potential to cause harm to the environment, to the economy, or to human health. And just a brief example, environment changes everything. Human health could be people getting hurt, people stepping on shells, or some of these plants have saps that people get on their skin, and then it causes boils, when it reacts with the sun. So it's painful. And of course, economic, people spending money addressing these issues, or pipes, or replacing things, management, and so on.
Gotcha. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I just had a bit of a learning lesson myself a few weeks ago. We had a few different plant species we were trying to figure out, whether they were invasive or non-native. And I didn't necessarily understand that difference at first. But just because a species isn't native to Michigan doesn't necessarily also classify them as an invasive species.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, the European honeybee, that's not from around here, but we need the honeybee and we utilize it. And so that is not an invasive species. Yeah. Dandelions are, not from around here, but they don't really cause that much harm either. So they're not really considered an invasive species.
Gotcha. There we go.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking a little bit too of how you found yourself in this role and working with invasive species management?
Yeah, so I actually am a native of Canada. So I came here. My biology degree was in the University of Western Ontario, and I kind of was really interested in the environment because my parents took me camping, and my parents are immigrants and they came here, and there's, back in the day without any internet and stuff, so they tried their best and they took me to different places and parks and really stoked my interest. And then I really got into like conservation. And so that's why I kind of ended up going in biology. And then from that, I came to Michigan State and I did my master's and PhD at Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. And part of that work had a little bit of invasive species, and that kind of transitioned and led me to this path, working for a conservation district.
We were just saying before the podcast started too that I've become friends with some of the fisheries and wildlife people, and just a great program over at Michigan State overall. I should also say we have another connection in that I lived right by the Canada border growing up, and so like vacation or even just day trips to Canada, crossing the bridge, the Blue Water Bridge. So
you also hopefully appreciate a little Tim Hortons.
So some of my friends are Tim Hortons haters. They just didn't grow up with it, I think, maybe, and I did. I love Tim Hortons.
Well, then we can be friends.
Yes, The Canadian maple donut with the filling. I don't know if they still have the one with the filling, but that was always my favorite.
Nice. Mine was a double chocolate.
Yes. Yep, I gotcha. Well, to get back on the subject at hand a bit more, obviously this podcast mini-series is all about pollinators, but the core of your work is about invasive species. Could you talk a little bit about that relationship between invasive species and pollinators?
Pollinators, just to go back a little bit, they take, pollen grains from like the male part of the plant, which is the anther, and then they transport it to the female part of the plant, which is the stigma. And sometimes that pollination can go, they need another plant to do that, or sometimes plants can do it, within themselves. Like, they have all the parts themselves. And so that function needs to occur. And, unfortunately, invasive species can, change the environment. That was one of the things that we talked about in the definition. And so invasive species has the ability to outcompete some of the native species. And that means like, changing the environment, changing like the food availability, it changes biodiversity. So picture this, you have, an insect, and that insect requires one specific plant for a certain part of its life cycle. So for example, the Karner blue butterfly, it needs the American lupine, for a part of its life cycle. But if that plant is no longer there, it ceases to be able to live and reproduce in that area. It may use other plants, for nectar, like, monarch butterflies. Like, they use a variety of plants, for nectar, but they do need milkweed, for at least one part of their life cycle. So invasive species can change the environment, change the shelter, the food availability. They can also introduce diseases for both the pollinators themselves or maybe other plants. So then there could be indirect effects of that way as well.
Gotcha. So this invasive species competition dynamic that's happening can happen with the plants that pollinators are going to pollinate, and then also with like other insects as well that are invasive,
exactly,
or other sorts of mammals or birds.
And one of the things I want to highlight is that when you have like, one plant is blooming, maybe it's blooming from June to August. Well, but there are species, pollinators that are awake in, like maybe end of April. Early June or something, like in May. And so they need something to kind of kickstart them, get that first meal in them when they emerge from hibernation. And so sometimes these invasive species will outcompete some of those early spring ephemerals. Lesser celandine is an invasive species that does that. And that could impact the food available for those early risers, so to speak.
Gotcha. Okay. You've kind of already touched on this a bit. So pollinators obviously have a very large role in bettering the ecosystem because of the pollination dynamic that's happening. Could you speak a little bit more about how this sort of more personalized interaction between a creature and a plant is benefiting this larger macro sort of wilderness?
So 1 out of every 3 bites of food we need requires pollination. And then, 3/4 of some of the plants actually need some sort of a pollination. So without these pollinators, our landscape would be very different, and it would change, and that would change, ecosystem services, some of the services that we get from the environment, and then just how things function. And you remove them, pollinators from this, web, then you can kind of see there'll be a cascading, breakdown of what we see.
Yeah, and I'm guessing like Michigan obviously has a diverse array of ecosystems. You have your coastal sorts like dunes landscapes. You have various sorts of forests. Pollinators are probably playing a role in each of those certain sets of plants interacting. Is that
Absolutely,
correct?
yeah.
Gotcha.
And so, you'll have certain like native plants. The cool thing about native plants is a lot of them are evolved to like live and withstand the conditions around here. And so we need them to thrive. Those long tap roots that kind of like anchor that plant into the ground, that also prevents erosion. And sometimes if you look at your lawn, the roots are probably about this big, like not very long for those that are listening, only maybe like an inch or even less than that. But then some of these long ones, I've seen plants that have roots as tall as I am.
Wow.
And they go really deep in, so they anchor the soil. And so when those plants are outcompeted or they're not there anymore or replaced, that changes the soil. It changes, the ground, the moisture. Some of these invasive species, like they take up a lot of water, like Phragmites. You see them around the edges of ponds, like that long stalk, the fluffy seed head. They're also all over the roads too.
Yeah.
And so when you have a lot of them, it's just drawing that water, changing the water, and changing the environment. And you do have a lot of pollinators that nest in the ground. There are a lot of ground nesting bees. So that could make it challenging for those species.
One thing I wanted to call out as well, like obviously you work in a tri-county area of sorts. Are there any particular sorts of plant and creature interactions that you particularly like want to shout out or focus on, since we're just kind of talking about ecosystems?
Yeah, so there's one species that I want to highlight, and it's called swallow-wort. So we have two species that are found here, pale and black swallow-wort. It's a vine. It has really beautiful star-shaped flowers, and people loved it. They brought it in the botanical gardens, but then as you can imagine, it started escaping, and it kind of got here, and people even like took it and were like, I want it in my garden, so they put it in here. And the problem with this plant, this vine, is that it is related to milkweed, and we all know the milkweed and the monarch butterfly relationship. But swallow-wort, it kind of like tricks the insects and like the native species, because they will, come and land and lay their eggs on it, which is fine. The eggs will be there, and those eggs will even hatch. But when those caterpillars, like the larvae, start eating and munching on the leaves, that's gonna 100% mortality.
Oh, wow.
So it can really devastate, like local, pollinator. And that it's not just a monarch butterfly. That also can harm other insects. It can also harm other like livestock in the area. So we definitely want some things like that to be, managed or removed, and people to keep an eye out for that. And another hot topic that we're dealing with is lesser celandine. I kind of mentioned it before in the interview. That one is kind of spreading along the Grand River, the riparian zone by the water, the flood zones. And the problem with that particular species is that it actually is like an early, spring ephemeral. So you'll see it early in the springtime, and it'll come in and it'll have like, it has tubers, and it has, bulblets, and then it has seeds and stuff. So it has a couple different reproductive strategies, making it really, easy, to spread. And the interesting thing about that plant is that it disappears really quickly. So within a month, that plant is gone. There's no trace of it. The tubers are underground. And so what is the problem with this is that it'll come in, it'll outcompete, the native stuff that should be there. And the flower is so short-living that, maybe it's not hanging around enough to provide that food and the nectar. And then when it dies, it creates a bare space, like an empty dirt stuff. And guess what happens when you have a lot of, bare space in disturbed areas?
Probably have soil issues, I would guess.
Soil issues come in, and then you have other invasive species that are more, garlic mushroom will come in, spotted knapweed and things of that will, come in. So then it's like a doozy in that area. And neither of that is good for the pollinators and for the environment.
Yeah. This is kind of bringing me back to like my schooling days, where you'll talk about, mutualistic relationships, and learning about those was so cool, like seeing how two species are like so closely connected and they interact with each other. Yeah. And then we hear the invasive species sorts of interactions, and they're just like kind of devastating, like literally and just like emotionally devastating to hear about, where like bugs or insects are hatching onto these plants, but they die when they eat them.
Yeah.
Terrible things. But yeah. We're just about at the halfway point, at the turning point of our podcast. Before I send folks off to break, though, and ourselves off to a short break, any other things you want to talk about that we haven't touched on so far in these sorts of general topics?
If you do a lot of recreation, outdoor recreation, you belong to hunting groups and stuff, these are all things that we can learn together. We need your help because I'm just one person in my area doing this work. And so I need help from other people being like, hey, I was hunting and I saw this, or I was fishing and I saw this. And so this is something that I think a lot of people can participate and be part of the solution with. And I think towards the end of the podcast, I'll offer some, strategies and things that people can do.
Yeah, this is a great setup. First, I have to say, I like that perspective of how it's important not only to help remove the invasive species, but just to identify where they're at in the first place. And second, yes, at the second part of this podcast episode, we'll switch on over, talk a little bit more about threats, but then also what we can do as individuals, collectively, what SISMAs are doing. So I think that's a perfect setup for the second part of our series. With that, then I'll give our folks a quick break, and so same with ourselves. So. Common Groundwater is produced in partnership with NRDC, an international nonprofit environmental organization with more than 3 million members and online activists. Established in 1970, NRDC uses science, policy, law, and people power to confront the climate crisis, protect public health, and safeguard nature. You can learn more about its work, like its efforts around Michigan pollinators and pesticides, at nrdc.org. Welcome back to Common Groundwater, a podcast by the Michigan Environmental Council. You're tuning into our mini-series all about pollinators, native plants, and how we can better protect them. I'm here with Shikha Singh of the Jackson, Lenawee, and Washtenaw SISMA, a invasive species management group. And we kind of kicked off the first part of our podcast, as I'm sure you know, talking about pollinators in a broader sense, around ecosystems, around invasive species, about the pollination process even. And you've very nicely queued up the second part of our podcast today, talking about what we as individuals and collectively can do. First though, I'd like to spend just a little bit more time talking about some threats that pollinators face. We talked a lot about invasive species and how they can outcompete the native plants pollinators need in various ways. But I know that there's a lot of other sorts of impacts as well. Would you mind going over some? Yeah,
some of the other ones, the threats that they face include herbicide and pesticide. So people will apply herbicide and pesticide to manage, whatever other insects or even other plants. And, I'm not here to say that, you should never use, any herbicide or chemical. No, there's a time and place to use it. But the important thing is to take precautions and to apply these chemicals in the environment in a responsible manner. And so one of the things I would urge people to do is to look at the label. Well, no, first I want to go make sure you're actually identifying what you need to remove and what the good things and the bad things are. And then once you identify a proper, an appropriate herbicide, make sure that if you are treating in a wetland or a pond, that you are using an aquatic approved herbicide or a pesticide. And if you don't have to use a broad, a spectrum, a broad pesticide that gets rid of everything, you can get away with the one that just works on grass, then use that one. But then if you find that you have to use a more broad, then do that. But then take steps to follow the label, read the label, because the label is a law, and don't apply it when it's just before it's going to rain, because you're going to wash a lot of that off, and then the runoff can harm and kill other species and other trees. So I think that is one of the things that's important. Also, things like climate change. We're seeing, shifts. We're seeing things like, some places it's getting a little bit drier. Maybe it's more conducive for these invasive species to move in. And yeah, those are some of the threats. There are a lot more, but we have a limited amount of time.
Yes, those are the biggest kind of overall. I just to go back to each one of those pieces. You know, like one thing that I've learned over time is, you know, we divided our world in a way into like climate zones, right? So like when you get a certain sort of plant, you might read an information label about how if it's in a certain climate zone, you should treat it this way. And those climate zones are changing as climate change happens, which makes plants struggle a bit more in some areas and be successful in others. So that reminded me of your climate change discussion. And then with herbicides and pesticides, your approach to it reminds me a lot of actually something that my doctor and I have just talked about, right? Like when you have like a medical issue, depending on what it is, of course. But in my particular case, we're talking about kind of ramping up. You're going through like a process and then slowly trying out procedures or processes that are a bit more intensive. Right. If we can mitigate the problem or manage the problem without needing to like go through major procedures or whatnot, well, let's do that. And it seems like a similar approach as you're suggesting with pesticides.
We want to be respectful of like the processes and the environment. I remember like back in the day, you know, you would see people just like spraying things, you know, just anywhere. You know, I see like parents in my neighborhood just like grabbing fistfuls of fertilizer and just like throwing it in clumps. And one, you're also wasting a lot of that, you know, chemical. Like if you're throwing it away and it's getting washed off, you're not going to see the results. And you're wasting your money, and nobody wants to waste money. But it also could have, you know, other impacts. And so definitely, you know, contact a SISMA person, contact someone from an agency like a state, county, to make sure that you are doing it correctly.
Yeah.
I also want to highlight, you know, sometimes the timing of application is important. So some of these herbicides, so you get a lot of plants that have rhizomes. The rhizomes are underground horizontal stems. And so they're underground, and then they send up shoots in different areas. And so sometimes when you like hack or cut one plant here, it'll send a shoot up over there and over there. And so one of the things that we tell people to do is that when you are dealing with things like Phragmites or Japanese knotweed, the best time to actually apply, you know, herbicides is at the end of summer, early fall, because you want to use the biology of the plant against it. End of summer, early fall, it's, you know, preparing for winter, sending all that nutrient back into the roots. And so if you can apply the herbicide at that time, you know, let it ride that wave, you might have a little bit more success. And that way you're applying a little bit less, you know, in the environment, and you're seeing more bang for your buck.
I like that.
And also, if you don't have to use herbicide, you know, do some hand pulling. You know, I know that can't be, you know, done in large infestations, but if you're dealing with a garlic mustard in your backyard, you know, as long as you're consistent, you know, you can go in and you pull those weeds quickly, and then you're always monitoring it. You know, as homeowners know, you know, once you buy your home, like that's your life. You're going to be spending your time gardening and weeding. It's always one project or another. So you're going to have to incorporate this as your, you know, as part of your maintenance of your house.
Awesome. Very cool. You've set us up really well again for the last part of our little talk, or second to last, I should say, which is what people can do. So we've talked about pesticides or other methods of dealing with you know, like creatures or plants that we don't want to have in our gardens and whatnot. What are some other ways that people can like help protect pollinators, promote them, or fight back on those that are threatening them?
Right. And so I'm really glad for that you know, question, because I talked a lot about doom and gloom, and it's like, oh my God, it's depressing and all these things. But there are things people can do. One is, you know, make sure that when you are outside and you're recreating, that you are cleaning your shoes, you are cleaning your gear, you're, you know, picking off that plant. So every time I go for a hike, I make sure my shoes are clean. I have like a little a hand brush where I can, you know, scrub everything off, or it has a pick where I can get that mud off, because some of these seeds can actually get stuck in the crevices of your shoes. And if you have a pet, like I had a chocolate lab growing up, and if your pets are like mine, they did not want to go back home. So they wanted their walk to last forever. The first thing my dog did was when we took him out of the car was do a couple laps around the backyard, right? And then who knows what was dropping off as seeds and stuff. So, you know, decontaminate yourself and maybe brush your pets, so that way you're not introducing new things to an environment. And then also, you know, landscaping. A lot of people love gardening. You know, it's a hot new activity. I think millennials have really embraced gardening. And people have also embraced the monarch butterfly. And there's a big campaign, you know, plant milkweed, and that's great. But recognize that we cannot just simply focus on one species. And by planting a variety of native plants, you can get plants that are blooming, throughout the summer. You also get plants that attract different pollinators, and it will have, a more healthier, balanced ecosystem. So avoid just planting one species. Like, look at the catalog. I guarantee you will find, a native species that fits the needs or your vision of landscaping. Having different types of trees also included in your landscape if possible is good. Making sure that you have, water sources available for pollinators, because in summer it gets really hot. And in some of these urban areas, there's like a lack of water. So having like a little dish with a rock that a bee can sit on and grab some water, having bee houses, butterfly houses, having shelters, for maybe some of the amphibian friends that we have could be helpful as well.
Yeah. Something that Carly and David Cirilli of Plymouth Pollinators, who were our guests on the last episode, had said was like, there seems to be more and more native plant sellers in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually like big sales, especially in the spring, that happen, or in the early summer. But they also said too, like if you come across a native plant seller, chances are they know it. They are very invested in native plants, and so they can just help you as well.
Exactly.
Help you out as you're making your purchases. So.
There are so many resources out there. I know the Audubon Society has a thing where you can put in your zip code and you can see what kind of native plants will attract different kind of birds. You can contact, us. You can contact, partners like NRCS, especially if you're in agriculture. They might be able to provide some assistance. There's just so much extension. Michigan State Extension or other extensions are important. Or just contact us. We're available, and we like talking to people, and we like helping people.
Yeah. That's a great point. This is a great time for me to mention, too, that for folks tuning in, if you do want to learn more, we will have some resources, including from your SISMA, just in the podcast description. So if you just scroll down a bit, you'll be able to see some links that will take you, and you'll be able to get more information. What are some of the things that your SISMA has going on that you might want to shout out, whether that be projects, events, etc.?
Yeah, so a couple of things that we have. We do have a spotted knapweed pull that'll be coming up in August. I believe it's August 11th. We'll do a lot of promotion for that, and we'll put that stuff on our social media. Okay. We routinely bring in experts to talk about invasive species. So we usually have a seminar coming and going. We will be working with the state to do a webinar later about some of the work that we're doing with some of our partners. Yeah, some volunteer opportunities will come out. So if you're just interested and you want to learn more, definitely feel free to reach out and visit our social media, because that's where we have a lot of things that we're posting about what's happening, and we're always looking for feedback. So if there's a need, or you're like, hey, I want to learn more, but I can't access some of these materials, or I need something that's going to help me able to read this better, then please reach out. We'll do the best that we can to make sure that we get the information for you.
Very cool. And you mentioned too that even for folks who are outside of Lenawee, Jackson, Washtenaw counties, there are other SISMAs and groups across the state covering every county that people can reach out to as well.
Yes, you can reach out to different SISMAs. And the cool thing about SISMAs is that we're all very unique. Not all of us are housed at a conservation district. Some of us are housed in a nonprofit. Some of them are a singular nonprofit themselves. And so we all have different setups. We all focus on different species. We are grant-based, so we do write a lot of grants to address some of these species and concerns as they arise. And we work with a variety of partners. So hopefully, if I don't know something, one of my colleagues, one of my friends, or my agency contacts will know. And so we work together. And that's the cool thing about SISMAs, is that we really are a network, and the network exists to support our communities.
Very neat. I love that. Well, Shikha, before we go, are there any other sorts of topics or things that you want to mention before we take on off and close out?
One of the things I want to highlight is that Michigan, the state that we are in right now, is extremely beautiful. There's a lot of cool resources. There's a lot of natural areas. dunes, we have forested areas, we have beautiful inland lakes, and we have fens. We have, Kirtland warbler that people have heard about the conservation, and we have the Massasauga rattlesnakes. And so we are very fortunate in the Great Lakes region. And I even expand that, every county, every state in North America or on the world has a lot of really cool natural resources. And I really urge people to kind of get to know those areas, to learn and visit and recreate, build those connections, emotional connections. Because once you get out and you use these natural resources, you feel like ownership of it. And you can appreciate the ecosystem services. So use these resources, they're yours, they're ours. And, take care of it, because we want to leave these resources for the future generation so that they can also make memories. We made memories with our family, camping, hiking, and walking, and I want to have another generation to experience the beauty and the awe of these resources.
Wonderful, wonderful words to set us off to. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you for the love of Michigan, even as a somewhat recent Michigander. So
yeah, nature is for everyone, and whether you're from here or you're traveling, it really is for everyone. There's something for everyone. So please take advantage of it.
Love that. Thank you. Well, with that then, thank you for taking part in this podcast episode today. Really appreciate it. I learned a lot. I thought I came in thinking, all right, I think I know some stuff, but I learned a lot, as I usually do on these. So I really appreciate that.
No, and I love the back and forth, because I learned a lot too. So I love, engaging in what people's questions are and understanding. So it's helpful for me. So
great. And for folks in the audience, thank you for tuning in. And if you want to learn more, once again, we have some additional resources from the JLW SISMA and from the Environmental Council and other groups right in our podcast description. And then lastly, thank you again to NRDC for being a production partner on this podcast as well. So with that, we'll see you soon.